So you're here, you're wearing a mask. Could you explain to me and the listeners why you're wearing a mask today?
Yeah, it was good. So this is Samboi. I go by Samboi and whatnot. And I run It's All Relative podcast or IAR podcast on IG and whatnot. And I'm wearing a mask today and this hat and these glasses and whatnot, stuff that I don't usually wear outside because there's been a lot of there's been a lot of radicalization in society, a lot more polarization and extremists coming out on all sides. And it just seems that no matter what point of view you choose to take, if you are a person who is vocal and expresses your opinions, saying out there for public consumption, that there is somebody who will find you problematic, or just take issue with the side that you happen to be taking, or even if you're not taking a side, no matter what, as long as you're putting yourself out there, um, so you're making yourself a possible target. We've seen people getting run up on, whether it's at a gas station, a grocery store, or or just right into their crib or their job, saying out in a public park. So I mean, it can happen anywhere to anybody, and I'm very open, becoming more open about my views on issues, especially politics and social, cultural type stuff. And it's just a precaution I'm taking for myself and for those around me.
Oh, I got you. So just to kind of preserve your identity a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, all this information, like there's still plenty of information of me that's out there, but I'm just not going to hand it over on a silver platter. I'm not going to
I
make it so easy to be like, oh, here's like 20 different pictures and here's all the times he's checked into these locations. Here's, blah, 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 blah.
I got you. And then that's why you suggested that Skype was a bit more of a safer network than Zoom, right?
And the thing is, Skype, because for those that don't know, Zoom has had back-to-back scandals because since the pandemic shut everything down, a lot of people have been running to these video conference type apps, Zoom, and for some reason, whatever reason, Zoom, even though even though we've had other ones like Skype and there's like the one on Facebook Messenger and there's plenty of other ones, IG, Zoom all of a sudden got huge notoriety. And the things that were uncovered is that they recently changed the subscription service to where if you're using the free version of the app, it will no longer encrypt your calls and whatnot. So, and they said that they explicitly did this so that way they can work with law enforcement better. And so, then the question becomes like, okay, so then you're just saying that if you can pay enough money, then you'll keep shit encrypted. And but that seems to just put a bigger bounty, on those issues anyway. And then there's also the fact that Google employees have been banned from using it, and I think it sets a pretty big precedent if Google is like, hey, this thing isn't secure enough, us for just to do video conferences with, especially when you would think they'd be capable of making their own app. And then the third point is a lot of people have been getting kicked out. A lot of people have been kicked out of their homes, their apartments, evictions, and whatnot because this pandemic, destroyed the economy, and the government's left us out to dry. And Zoom has been playing its role in this shit by helping courts that are closed, helping them to speed up evictions exclusively. Not like speeding up evictions and then like violent crimes and then like police corruption or stuff like that. No, just to speed up evictions and different cases related to getting people out their homes and whatnot.
And the way that they're speeding up that process is by purposely like knowing that the people who are losing their homes probably don't have a connection to the internet or a computer. Is that kind of what it is?
Well, it's not just that. It's just the fact that like, look, you can see all around that it's basically them just showing what side they're on. Because anybody who's paying any sort of attention or just lives a regular life, you either yourself or know somebody else who has had a huge drop in their income and their quality of life. I'm sure, saying related to this pandemic. And so for Zoom to come in, almost like a new kid on the block, and it's basically just saying that, yeah, we're going to work with the state, we're going to work with the government, we're going to work with the police, all of whom are, facing heavy criticism at the moment for continuing on with these barbaric practices, like the ones, and they're just like, hey, we're here for you, we're here to work with you, we want to be on your side. You know what I'm saying? This is basically the only thing they haven't said yet is back the blue or Blue Lives Matter, or, shit like that.
I got you. So that in all aspects, they're supporting the government 100%,
Mm-hmm.
although they're not publicly announcing it. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing Zoom hasn't said anything regarding Black Lives Matter, right?
I haven't. I'm not gonna. I won't speculate on that. I haven't. I don't know for sure. Um, but the thing is, even if they were to at this point, it'd be like, damn, like you couldn't even keep your nose clean, you know what I'm saying, for a certain amount of time to give people the benefit of the doubt. Because the thing is, like, no doubt, like even Skype is probably just as bad, but we don't know. You know what I'm saying? They haven't had back-to-back controversies related. It's not something that's popped up on my radar, and I like to think I'm somebody who keeps up with, that sort of stream of information. So I feel like it would have come up, saying during this time, or or the IG messengers, video, calls and whatnot, or the Facebook Messenger, or any of the other, saying apps. For some reason, Zoom came up out of nowhere. It seems maybe they've been around for years and just have really low engagement, but they came up real quick, and just whoever's in charge, the CEOs, just decided that this is the side we want to be on.
And the two scandals that you're referring to, which ones are they? Particular cases or?
So there was I guess that there was the subscription one, right? The subscription and encryption one. I haven't heard any cases specific to that, but there's been plenty of cases already. There's been cases already pushed through various means, through Zoom and otherwise, of people losing their homes. And as you said, like, some people don't have access to the internet and they get their phones cut off and whatnot. There are some people who just went there. I just read a story about, like, one of the sessions that was had where they're just pushing people in and out, basically saying that a lot of people there didn't have any lawyers. They didn't understand they didn't have any legal representation. They didn't understand some of the terms and the phrasing and all the jargon and whatnot. And I don't know exactly what amendment that is, or if that's something like under the Miranda rights or whatever. But it's like, how are you in court and shit without legal representation? If you went out and committed a crime and got arrested and shit, they read your Miranda rights. They're going to tell you that you're going to get same representation on the state and whatnot. But in this situation, it's like this has been a way for them to help circumvent the normal course of due process. And it's just it's just disgusting.
And their excuse for doing so would be, well, the pandemic's going on, so we don't have our usual blah blah blah, right? And I agree 100%, because I mean, especially lower income people, it's more likely that they don't have an education like people who have a higher income. Mm-hmm. And so naturally they're not going to have as much knowledge to back themselves up, right? Because we all know that knowledge is power, and if you lack knowledge, then somebody else can take advantage of you, manipulate you with that knowledge that they have.
Exactly.
Fuck, man. All right, man, let's take it back. Tell me and the listeners a little bit about yourself. Like, I mean, obviously you said your name and you said talking about your podcast, but just like, where'd you grow up? What's kind of like, if you just had to explain to us who you were as a person, in whatever shape or form you wanted to describe yourself, if you can just tell us.
Yeah, so I'm from, I've lived in basically I'm from Los Angeles, different parts of Los Angeles. I've never lived in the city proper, but I've lived in various cities within the county. And after high school, I went to go live in North Carolina for a bit, did that for about 7.5 years, and then I've been back. And I will say throughout that time, so as far as like me coming up and whatnot, I'm a black man, from LA County and whatnot. I grew up in a family, working class people, whom either they just had regular working class jobs, or they were like the counselors in schools and whatnot. That was kind of the dynamic that I came up under. And then one of the things that was significant about my childhood is that even though I'm the oldest of multiple children, I never really felt like a big brother, because I spent so much time, not even like the first several years of early childhood and whatnot, not around my siblings, not around parts of my family, and living with different like family members and whatnot. And it's not because there was like particular turmoil or whatever. It was just a matter of it's just a matter of different resources and people in your life being available to help you manage saying the task of raising family. It's a very it's a very difficult thing. When I was born, by the time I was 6 years old, you know what I'm saying, there was all four of us. So four kids within a 6-year span for two people, that's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is, so I ended up spending a lot of time by myself or around adults, and and I should say mild mannered adults. You know,
what does that mean? Mild mannered.
Mild mannered. So they weren't. You know, I didn't. When I say adults, I wasn't growing up around like people. There's people who just all they did was they went to work, and you know they had their little circle or whatever, and they would have their little hobbies and activities and whatnot. But it was just very mild, very vanilla, you could say, very mild mannered. Adults I was hanging around. And so I took on a lot of that. As a result, I grew up not being very socialized. And, I've never been tested for like autism or anything. And it took me a long time to understand what they meant by like autism being a social disease, in that it happens as a form of you being conditioned to not engage with people, right? Or the conditions that have made you what you are have left you unable or at a disadvantage in being able to communicate with people, pick up on different cues, anticipate, conversation, and able to provide feedback, etc. Right? So definitely was dealing with that, and then became super aware of it like in my teenage years, that, oh shit, I really need to like really start developing myself and whatnot. And
did you say that you were diagnosed with autism?
No, I said I've never knowingly been diagnosed with it. I was just using that as like, that's the way that autism is described.
Oh, okay, I got you.
And just trying to find, trying to find any overlays, just relating to that, because that's the term that I best know to explain, like looking back how it was. So I'm not saying that like, oh, I was never diagnosed as this, but I do feel it's that way. It's just me looking and being like, oh, this kind of seems like what's implied by the description of social autism as I've heard it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just kind of I just grew up not really knowing how to communicate with my peers, not being really savvy on, shit, just being kind of, out of the loop, which is fine to a degree, but it's like, it was just becoming obvious that it was tearing a little too much in one direction. Right. Mm-hmm. And, luckily around this time, my parents, they got me and my siblings involved in a bunch of different activities and hobbies and stuff, and sports mostly, and extracurricular activities that helped, break that shit down and show that there's also some initiative that I need to take in learning how to, be more adaptable, be willing to try different things, to work through pain, work through discomfort, and to persevere through stuff, even if it doesn't seem immediately rewarding. Those just, just trying to really take like the big chunks right now. And then, this path kind of continued, and then I left high school and whatnot. And then that began like a whole nother wave of development. I was challenging a lot of my religious and spiritual views that I'd grown up as a teenager. I was a late bloomer in many respects. So this was a time for me to, indulge in the things that a lot of people already got in high school. But then at the same time, I'm on my own as an adult. I'm on the other side of the country where I don't know anybody. I didn't know anything about the place I moved to before I went there, basically.
North Carolina, you're talking about?
North Carolina, and I'll get back to why I went to North Carolina in just a second. But like after high school, and I didn't go to a 4-year college. I was just in and out of community college a bit. So that really shaped, my shit, like being on my own for a lot of the time, and having my own space.
Okay, how old were you when you went to college, or when you went to North Carolina? Like from what age to what age?
It was right after high school. It was I was 18. And I got back in 2015, right before, excuse me. Yeah, so I got back in 2015 when I was 25.
Okay.
So I've been back for over 5.5 years now.
For sure.
And that was just another wave of development that was more critical and really thinking about like, okay, why were things a certain way? Why was blah 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 blah? And the way that I ended up choosing, and I enjoyed my time, and there's still plenty of people that I know from there. I still have bonds with people. I still have great memories of there, and it was just a chance for me to live on my own and to try out the things that I never felt like I had the guts to do or had the know-how to do out in California. for whatever, because like I said, because I just grew up with this disadvantage of not knowing how to socialize and not having a lot of trying experiences. I had plenty of good experiences, but I didn't have enough shit that made me get, give you some grit, right? And in any case, so I started, becoming so the reason I went to North Carolina in the first place is I was just very listless, didn't really have a lot going on in my life. My parents had gotten divorced, and that was fundamental in a particular way, and I'll get to that. Sorry, but the reason I got to North Carolina was I was just kind of listless, and one of my teachers, she recognized that I didn't have a strong sense of direction, and she was just like, "Look, dude, you need to pick something. Um, whatever, you need to pick." She was basically like, "You need to pick something." So she gave me a book with all the different colleges in it and what their specialty is or whatever. And at the time, I thought I wanted to do journalism. I wanted to do journalism, and I saw that I saw that A&T University, which is a very popular historically Black college. It's in Greensboro, North Carolina, and so from that one point of that one tangent of understanding was enough for me to be like, all right, that's where I'm going. And mind you, I would never even end up attending A&T University. I would only ever be on its campus, I think, 2 or 3 times. So it wasn't about the school. It was just having that faint connection, justification.
How is it that you went to that school without being on campus no more than 3 times?
No, I didn't go to the school.
Oh, you didn't end up going.
No, what I'm saying is that like I had no interest in. I didn't really anticipate or prepare for like actually attending a university. It was simply the fact that I knew it was a historically Black college, and I was like, oh, then this must be a decent city for a Black man to live.
Oh, okay. So
sorry about that.
No, you're good. So basically, the college just influenced you to go to the state in which that college was in, kind of thing.
Yeah, in the city.
Okay, the city. Okay.
Yeah, and but otherwise I had a good time. I feel like I had a really good time. Made a lot of meaningful relationships, some of which are ongoing to this day. And as far as visiting, yeah, I would love to be back. I just haven't been back in the time that since the time that I've left. So that's how I chose that. And then one more thing about like my childhood and whatnot that was influential is my parents' divorce, which happened when I was around 11, 12 years old. Because this really fundamentally changed the dynamic of how I looked at people, and then of course like my parents, because in a divorce, it can make at least one of the parties get very cutthroat. And in this situation, it very much was that case. My mother was the very cutthroat person, and my father was more contemplative, more calm, and just trying to go along with stuff. Basically, my mother was trying to get me and my 3 siblings to make up false accusations that my father was a sexual predator and had molested us. And being that I was the oldest and had the most of my own mind, developed, I stood against this, and this completely changed the dynamic of the relationship between me and my mother until her passing in 2011 and whatnot.
Sorry about that, man.
We all got to go, and it's unfortunate, but and there were plenty of times in which we communicated in between them, but it was just like, things are never the same. It's like you tried to get me on board with this nonsense. And anyway, the thing that it really showed me was like, oh shit, my parents are not just my parents. They're their own people, and they have all these other parts about them that have nothing to do with, them just being my mommy and my daddy. And this is, fundamental, because then you start looking at everybody else that way. And start thinking about all the different, sides, facets. And then hopefully if you're reflective enough, you start looking at yourself in that way. And so, let me just sit up again. So that kind of like summarizes like the big takeaways of stuff that was like helping to shape my mind and the things that I look for and the things that I consider, because now you jump to the present. And in these last several years, I've really tried to, develop I've always wanted to be an artist of some kind. It used to be, being a poet, and I wanted to be a writer, and then like maybe a songwriter and whatnot. And, now the longest running thing has been music. And, and it's just like, since I came back to Cali with all these new experiences and skills and just being like, okay, I can actually feel like I can take hold of the reins, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of grew up thinking that, acknowledging that, yeah, there's a lot going on in various parts around Los Angeles and different counties and stuff. And it's like, um, but it's not insurmountable. And if you have a little bit of ability to adapt to your surroundings and to take in different information from different sources, just soak up game, essentially, then it's not as daunting in some respects,
Yeah.
you know. And so, now we get to the last few years, these last several years, where I've continued to develop my artistry as a musician. I've continued to develop the way that I communicate with people, finding more fulfilling, enriching relationships, and then also pushing myself to contribute more. Not just like waiting for inspiration or just waiting for when I'm in the mood to do shit, but sometimes just sending that text message or that voice message just to let people know you're on their mind or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Or just putting in that extra 15 to 20 minutes when you got nothing else to do to sit and work with your instrument, or to set up a meal plan or an exercise regimen, or saying just to get together some notes for you to study so that you can develop whatever craft and mission you're working on. So ultimately, if I had to summarize my life, it's just been about learning how to overcome, my various shortcomings that were very much related to like introvertedness, so like leaning more into extrovertedness, and then coming to grips with the complexity of how people are, how I am, and understanding that there's a lot of gray where I used to think there was just black and white.
Wow. Yeah, man, that's beautiful. And in a lot of ways I could relate to you. And obviously we're both human beings, so I think pretty much every human being suffers, right, in some shape or form. But in particular, I mean, my parents got divorced when I was a younger kid as well. I feel like on a spectrum of introvert to extrovert, I think I would also maybe be leaning a bit more towards the introvert. And I think that would be a good topic to kind of continue talking on, because I think a lot of people, I think most of us kind of classify ourselves under introvert, extrovert. And then I feel like there's specific kind of characteristics that make up those kind of people, introvert, extrovert. But it's kind of interesting because I feel like me being someone who would go more towards introvert, I'm starting to find, as I've pushed myself, kind of like you're saying, to be more social and kind of tackling my fears and things of that sort. I'm actually, I mean, I can be an extrovert, like a very much extrovert, but it just depends on the context of the situation, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely,
But
and that's the thing. Context is king. That's kind of like the way I summarize it. Like give you a quotable, is that context is king. Is that what is the situation? What is my mood like? Where is my level of experience? Who's around me?
mhm.
All these things and so many more.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think before I would kind of, I don't know if you had this experience, but you can tell me afterwards. But I feel like at certain points that was kind of like my excuse. Like when I felt like doing something, I was kind of like, oh no, like I'm more introvert, so I'll just stay home, or like I'm more introvert, so like I'll just avoid social media, like I don't need it, like what I'm saying, like I'm more of a, I'd rather talk over the phone and just do direct messaging and stuff like that. And I come to find after experimentation and kind of pushing myself to be more social, not only in person but through social media and through the internet, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually a very social person. It's just
Mm-hmm.
it was more so that I was afraid of judgment, and I was afraid of, and this part I didn't even know about, I wasn't aware about, but I was so insecure and I was so unaware of who I actually was that I didn't know how to communicate and have like um I was afraid to communicate because I didn't really know what my opinions were on certain things. I didn't know where I stood about things. But now that I've been investing a tremendous amount of time and energy, and not so much, it's not like a forceful thing. It's just, this is just my moment to invest into myself. And now I'm commenting on people's stories. I'm commenting on people's things. Like I see something, I say, you know what? Let me put my input on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think this person's being kind of arrogant. Let me bring awareness to that.
Right.
Like, before I would have never done something like that because I said, no, I just want to avoid all the negativity. I just want to avoid like causing any confrontation. But it's like, no, I mean, we bring up the whole thing about Black Lives Matter. Like you got to voice yourself when you believe there's an injustice, or when you believe there's a bully, or when you believe there's something negative out there. And, and so, yeah, do you feel you kind of saying that you're also an introvert, do you also kind of feel that vibe, that what I'm trying to
Yeah,
explain?
yeah, absolutely. It's a form of self-sabotage. You only anticipate, it's a case of like self-sabotage because you don't want to allow yourself to have a good time, or you don't want to allow yourself to try something different and explore your boundaries and admit, because then you'd have to admit that you are wrong. you know and then on the other side, it's also like catastrophic thinking. You're just always anticipating the worst, like, oh, if I go out there and I dance and people don't like it, then they're going to mock me. And then like, this wasn't as much a concern when I was a teenager. But you can get got at any time. It's like on social media, so you can become a meme and live on forever in people's minds as a source of mockery. And so you just think about the worst case scenarios, or the case of you having to acknowledge that you were wrong about something as an excuse to not go out and do stuff, or to not take that chance. Because the thing is, you're going to get humiliated. You're going to fuck up, but you're not going to get anywhere without taking that leap. It's like, because if you take the chance, you might fuck up and then have to go back to square one. But if you don't take any chances, then you're never going to be able to move past square one, period. No question, no, full stop. And so just like you said, like with the introverted thing, it's we get we do end up getting taught that oh, you fall under one category of behavior, or because you've shown interest in doing things a certain way, or just engaging in certain activities, or certain ideas, that okay, this is what you are and you're only that, without explaining that no, this is what you maybe lean into, or what you've been conditioned to primarily concern yourself with. But then there's all these other elements. So like, so actually, like, use some hard numbers. Let's say that, like, if there was an actual test that really dissect this shit, and it told you, oh, you're 75% introvert and then 25% extrovert. The extrovert comes out, what I'm saying, maybe in political discussions, in political situations, or maybe it comes out when you see, some type of social injustice, or maybe it comes out, maybe it comes out when you see, maybe it comes out over debating what style of music and subculture you most identify with. I definitely belonged, saying, in that category, because a lot of my identity at the time was tied in with the underground hip hop scene, as it was referred to. And that has its own value system and cultural signifiers and whatnot. But the point being that we are each made of multitudes. Like, there's the whole thing about, like, people saying, oh, I don't like labels because I don't like being pigeonholed to one thing. It's like, first of all, saying that you have no label is a label, right? Is a label in it. Like, the fact that you're not wearing a label is sending a signal. All of these things are about sending signals. The fact that you don't participate in something and then actively say that's a signal. The only way you're not sending a signal is if you don't say shit.
Or even that could be a signal, right?
Actually, as a matter of fact, you're right. The only way to not say anything is to not even be within the realm. Exactly. It's to not even be there. And so, but the way I try to look at it is like, no, I love labels. It's just that there's multiple ones. You know what I'm saying? And depending on the situation, depending on my mood, and depending on what I know, depending on who's around me, etc., you know what I'm saying? There's a different label that applies. And it's not necessarily like, oh, me picking one out and saying, like, oh, I'm going to be this. It's just a matter of, in life, you have to make choices. You have to zig or you have to zag. And based on the how people summarize, like, oh, your actions and your mood and your energy you give off, that's a performance. And we grade that and we say that, oh, this is what they were acting like, or this is somebody who's acting like a madman. Even if you may know that person, you don't really think that they're, crazy all the time. In that situation, that label was appropriate based on your perception of whatever performance they were giving, no matter, regardless of if their reaction in the situation was justified. So, but yeah, to answer your question, yeah, there's a lot of, self-sabotage we do. There's a lot of people limiting themselves by saying, oh, I only wear one label, or I don't wear one label. It's like, no, you wear multiple labels because you are of multitudes. You are legion. We are each legion. We are all made of multitudes within us. And the
legion? Legion? What does that mean?
Legion is it's an X-Men character, but what it comes from is the Bible. Because there's a situation in the Bible where some demons are causing some shit or whatever, and somebody comes through to say them, and so they drive the demons, and the demon identifies itself and says, "Oh, we are legion," as in, we are multitudes, or there's a lot of us, because the person who talks to the demons casts them into sends them into some pigs that are nearby or whatever, and these pigs kill themselves by like running either into like off a cliff or whatever, or running into like a body of water and drowning. Wow. But yeah, the legion just means like multitudes.
Okay.
That's the allegory or whatever, the metaphor. But they know we are each made of multitudes, and we have the capacity to develop ourselves, uncover new things, develop old things, discard certain things. We have the capacity for all that, and I feel like a lot of people we don't get fed that. We don't get taught that. We get taught that no, you have a particular lane that you fit in, a particular title that you wear, and to stray away from that is to, jeopardize your life and earn scorn and judgment from others.
Yeah, when in reality, it's like, why should I give a fuck if I get judgment or not?
Exactly.
Well, I was gonna say, what's like a particular like scenario in your life that you've kind of had to like, that maybe you've caught yourself following like a specific label and like you having to kind of challenge that, or does anything come to mind?
Oh, plenty of things come to mind, but one thing that I've definitely evolved on is the LGBT issue. I was never anti-LGBT, but I held some very antiquated views about homosexuality and transgenderism and whatnot, and through education and through listening to people's testimonies and being more receptive to the idea that I don't know everything, and that I may be wrong, and that other people's experiences will vary. That people's experiences inherently vary. So there was definitely a time when I would act repulsed at the sight of seeing two gay people, primarily men. I will say that I've definitely fell into that stereotype of not being grossed out as much by seeing two girls kiss, as opposed to two guys kiss. But in any case, having that understanding, or something, or thing is even more serious shit that some people still hold, even though they say they're accepting of LGBT people in theory. In practice, they don't believe that, they should be able to raise kids, that should only be done by either single parents for some reason, or a man and woman two-parent household. Which is not to even speak on the quality of the parents raising them, just the fact that, just keep them away from the queers.
So what was your mindset when you kind of were repulsive against LGBT, and then what was your mindset when you were repulsive, and then what was the perspective which kind of shifted your thought process on it? So
part of it was just not having anybody around to actually talk about it, just not knowing anybody.
Okay.
So it was one thing. It was just like, if the only source of information you're getting is from people who are speaking negatively about a group, and there's nobody else around that usually checks them, or they greatly outnumber the people who are criticizing them, then what are you going to believe as a child, as a teenager, who yourself doesn't have any life experiences and is unsure about yourself? And so part of it was just not knowing people. Another part of it was religion, and I feel like now I consider myself a secular humanist. It's probably the best way to describe my spiritual beliefs at this point. But there was a time when I considered myself, I get one of the Protestant, some type of Protestant, Christian faith or whatever. And then obviously there's negative, saying connotations, decrees about homosexuality. Even though in the New Testament, which is what, Christians are supposed to observe, Jesus doesn't mention it. He explicitly just talks about welcoming everybody. He doesn't say gay people by name, but it's implied that if he's going to accept prostitutes and accept lepers and accept all these other people, then why wouldn't they accept gay people as well? And that's why you have certain denominations. I don't know exactly which ones. I think Presbyterian is one of them, but they're one of the denominations of Protestantism, Christianity, that has come around on the LGBT issue as well. Although I don't know, I think the stuff that I was taking from was more like prosperity gospel, and then certain of black Christianity. Which, when I say black Christianity, it's tends to be a little more hard line. I would say they're still very much anti-LGBT, even though the prevalence of LGBT people is expansive within there, especially the gospel music scene, and just other creatives and whatnot, as it just happens. And but in any case, I just started as you start peeling back the layers of religion and whatnot as you gain new experiences, you gain more education. So you hear different stories. Of course, media also plays a role. There was different social media was starting to become a thing, and so people were just having more of these conversations and engagements that were not happening anywhere else. Even on older, like seemingly transgressive platforms like a MTV or some of the earlier chat room sites and whatnot that helped develop, excuse me, the stuff that we have now. But it was just a glimmer in someone's eyes. But as far as once again, like you start peeling back the layers of religion, questioning things like, why is this thing interpreted this way here? Why is this thing written over here? Why do certain interpretations completely keep out stuff like the Dead Sea Scrolls or different same practices? Why are there so many different denominations if there's one sole truth at the end of you just start asking those real critical questions and just start peeling back the layers. So it's not just one thing or one situation or one element, it's multiple things that coalesced that just kind of hit a boiling point where I just decided, no, I can have a strong set of values and morals and secular justifications for everything that I felt was exclusive to the Bible without all the negative shit, especially the fact that the person who's responsible in the Bible for the most amount of wanton violence and death and destruction and pain is the Creator itself, which doesn't make me think that like, oh, God is real and it's malevolent as it is benevolent. It just seems to be like, oh no, this is a human being projecting human characteristics and moods onto a figure that has omnipotent power.
Omnipotent?
Omnipotent, which just means
infinite. Which just means,
well, not so much infinite. It means more like all-encompassing.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Omnipotent. Yeah, omnipotent is mean, or they have omnipotent, knowledge. Like they know everybody's thoughts even before they happen. Shit like that. So you just start peeling back, layers and layers and layers of your the belief system you have. And, for some people that creates a huge crisis. But for me, it was an awakening because it allowed me to see like, oh shit, this is a DIY project. My moral code is a DIY project. I can put this together myself. I don't have to just take the fucking manual that was given to me. I don't have to just wear the fucking suit, saying that I was given to wear, and it's good. And I will say this, it is good to know how to groom yourself to fit into different situations because, every ecosystem is different and you should have a certain level of comfort in being able to navigate different situations and communicate with different people to a degree. But then it's also good to have that part of yourself that breaks away and says, yeah, I'm only going to wear the suit 3 days a week and only in these situations. All right, the rest of the time, fuck off.
And when you say wear the suit, what exactly do you mean? Like you're saying to pretend to be something, or what do you mean?
Well, see, here's the thing. So, like I said earlier about how when we gauge people's performance, the summary of everything. And when I say performance, I don't mean artificial or fake or forced. What I mean is that we all have the capacity to, use profanity or not use profanity in communicating, right? And depending on the situation, for many people, you're not going to use the same level of profanity or coarseness around, say, your grandparents as you would, saying even with your your cousins who are the same age as you, saying and they're younger, or with your coworkers versus, your drinking buddies or people you just hang out with for recreational activities and stuff. So it's not so much like, oh, you being something that you're not. It's just realizing that, okay, maybe in this situation, you don't need to show the full 100% of what you are. And of course, I think there's a thing like, for many people, especially when you're younger, you think that not keeping everything 100 all the time, you feel like that's a betrayal of who and what you are. When really people aren't even keeping it 100 when they interact with you. That's a facade. We all like to think that oh, everything would just be better if people could just keep everything a buck with us, to just keep everything 100% honest. But it's like, no, sometimes you have to be passive because we are emotional creatures. We don't always do the most rational thing when we hear true information. And so when I say like wear the suit, I mean going along with whatever social contracts or whatever demands are being made of the situation. Because even in this analogy, wearing the suit could mean just learning how to get along with gang members. Saying just chilling out with them on the block. Not trying to be a part of the shit, but just like finding a means of like engaging with these individuals in a way that just keeps things moving forward.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that means just dialing back some of the criticisms you may have about about whatever.
Yeah, man. The big thing that I took away from that, and I love everything that you said, and to kind of simplify everything you said, I always like to try to find like the most simple kind of answer. Is like, I think the change in suits or the different, because you said like depending on the context, you might use profanity or you might not. If you're your grandparents, at the bar, or let's say with like police officials or something. I think it's not so much like that you're being dishonest. It's just a level of emotion that you're not going to express. Because if you think about it, when you do curse, when you are using profanity, which not everybody does, but a lot of us do, like that's usually a high level of emotional expression, right? And maybe not even in a negative way. It could be saying fuck you, blah blah blah, or it could just be like fucking hey, you're stupid, like just hanging out with friends. And I think it's like you said, we're creatures and we have emotion, and we don't have an infinite capacity for emotion, because emotion is a form of energy. The same way that I could sit here and I could, pick up some weights and stuff. Emotion is kind of in my opinion, emotion is kind of the fuel for our spirit, or the fuel for us to get shit done. If there's no emotion behind you trying to accomplish something, you're gonna be going maybe like 10 miles per hour. But the more emotion you kind of add to it, then you obviously you expend a bit more energy, but there's a lot more, maybe a lot more precision. There's a lot more, you're a lot more direct maybe, or you're just expending more energy. So in reality, if you think of yourself as an energy source, you obviously can't be expending like 80%, you can't be at 80 to 100% capacity all day long. I can't be emotional about every little thing I do, right? You have to
exactly.
you have to fit the context of the situation. And for instance, right? Because the things that I talk about, I apply them all the time. So right now, this is a perfect example. When we started this podcast, I was tired. Emotionally and physically, I'm tired. It's been a long day. And in order for me to kind of channel my energy and to kind of regain my energy, I wanted to ask you a lot of questions, and I wanted to listen to you. And kind of slowly but surely throughout the podcast, I've been cultivating my energy back to myself.
Yeah, that's what's up.
Because there's something about you can recharge your energy too. Me just listening to you, it kind of inspires me, and I gain perspective, and it kind of really just allows me to relax, and it kind of recharges my batteries in a way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and the thing is, we are, like that's the thing about about relationships and whatnot, and realizing how many levels there are, to it, and how it flexes. Because like you said, sometimes you just want to hit somebody up, to listen to them. And then as they start feeding you this stuff, then you start going, oh shit, this is clicking. This is also like, like, oh wow, okay, now I can express this thought that maybe I couldn't express in these other situations. And this is the thing, like it's a process of uncovering, uncovering parts about yourself, uncovering parts about one another, and then we feed off of that. That is a source of energy, so no matter what terms you use, because I'm not like I said, I don't necessarily believe in like the spirit, but when you talk about like, oh, what gives me, the term I use is momentum, or drive, like what keeps me, going. And part of it is these conversations, and then also another big part of it isn't just being able to have back and forth. Sometimes I enjoy dominating. Sometimes I enjoy being the person who's, really at the center of attention, which seems to contradict the thing I was saying about introvertedness, but that was something I had to uncover about myself. that, oh shit, I really do enjoy being the center of attention in some scenarios. I just needed to develop myself to the point where when I was the center of attention, it was actually productive. And there were people, not just myself being proud of myself having a big head, but other people saying like, hey, I really actually enjoyed listening to you. And then oftentimes, the reason, and oftentimes I'm human, I get tired too, and I feed off of other people. I'm always absorbing information and trying to optimize my way of thinking and behavior. So then I love also being able to like pass it off and have somebody else, what I'm saying, be at the center. But it's being able to, it was coming to the, yeah. So yeah, man, yeah, I'm glad I can play that role.
Yeah, brother. It's just yes, in my opinion, it's kind of like channeling your flow, And the thing is, like, for instance, like with so you're the third podcast that I've done like via Zoom or via the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of felt there was one week where I did about 5 podcasts. 4 of them were for this podcast, and then one of them was for another podcast. But that whole like week, I kind of had felt like every podcast I had done, it was just me kind of like, I had so much on my mind, I had so much energy, so much on my mind. And I never did the statistics, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say definitely I was talking more than 50% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I kind of became aware of that. Like I become aware, like, man, like I feel like I'm talking a lot more than my guests were talking,
Mm-hmm.
And, it kind of woke me up to the idea that, I don't know, it's like one art form is being able to like to speak your own voice, but then another art form is to actually like be able to listen and then ask questions. Like it's 2 different art forms, and I think it's really important to actually master both. Because if you're only good at talking, and you want to hang out with a friend and you just want to talk, they have certain emotional needs as well.
Mm-hmm.
And whether they're too shy to tell you about it, everybody needs someone to hear them out. Like everybody needs it. Everybody needs someone to say, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And otherwise, you develop a relationship where it's just like it's just one direction.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to make that point.
No, I mean, absolutely. Because I think this is really relevant to the situation with the pandemic and even beforehand, because, I'm somebody who's always kept a fairly tight circle. And, I mean, the thing is, I continue to make friends throughout every stage of my life, but, but then also you lose people. And part of the reason why you lose people is you start to, once again, uncover different parts of themselves or come to certain revelations like, hey, I've been hanging out with this person for like 6 months, and I'll hit them up to check up on them or just call them randomly just to see how they're doing, or just, be like, hey, I was thinking about you, whatever, just, and then they only hit me up, like maybe they'll hit me up for like to come to an event or whatever. But sometimes it's only events that they're hosting or that they're participating in and shit, obviously, give my support, or they only hit you up when they need a ride or when they low on trees or whatever, just that general shit. It's just like, look, it's just like, or sometimes, you hit somebody up and they, you give them a thought out message, a thoughtful message, and they just respond with something quippy and real quick and just inconsiderate, just like, oh, yeah, I'm good. Everything's all right. Thanks for asking, whatever. And it's just like, all right, whatever. It's like it's like you don't want to burn bridges. And the mentality I'm trying to take is that, like, trying to express is that, you're going to find that you come across the bridge more often than the other party. And you have to decide for yourself if it is worth it. If you are giving, say, let's say that, you're giving 60%, saying energy to a relationship, right? Any type of relationship, for, friend, romantic, platonic, business, professional. And you're saying, damn, I'm putting in 60%, but I feel like, I should be really only putting in like 45%, saying, given the, situation or whatever the fuck. Or let's just say you want to get it to 50. Let's just use 50-50 as the barometer, right? And let's say you want to get it down to 50-50. Now, of course, there's several ways you can do this. You can bring it up directly to the person and see how they respond. And it's usually going to go one of 3 ways. Either they are going to continue on contributing the level that they were at. They're going to increase their level of contributions, or it's going to decrease. Those are the only 3 options. And you have to decide what you are going to tolerate, what you want to tolerate. And of course, this can change over time, but you need to be asking yourself that, regularly with any relationship. How much, how much longer do I want to continue to contribute this much? And just like with this pandemic and shit, I just noticed that it's just really exposed some people even more. That like, oh, when there's not, certain things going on and shit, then you're not hitting me up at all. You're not checking up on me. The phone's been dry the last 3 or 4 times. I can look through like the messages and see like, oh, it was just me hitting you up, giving a fuck, and you just completely fell off. So it's like, okay, whatever. I'm not gonna, I'm trying to, now that I'm older and shit and realize that like life changes and sometimes, people will come to the grips with the fact that they were being assholes or inconsiderate. I'm just like, I try not to get in the mode where I'm just like start blocking people or being like, oh, I'm gonna burn this bridge, but I am gonna come tend to it less often.
You are gonna what?
I'm gonna come tend to it less often.
You said
like
content. So what do you mean by that?
No, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna come to it less often. The bridge.
Oh, okay. So you're gonna go less to that person. Or
right.
In other
exactly.
words, you're gonna invest less.
Invest, yes, yeah. Instead of burning that bridge, just invest less into it.
Yeah. I think this is a really good, like, the conversation we're having right now about relationships. I think it's really important. Hopefully the listeners get a lot of value, because I think it's something that everybody can relate to it. Everybody's had a friend, everybody's had a parent, everybody's had, people who have been in relationships, like, and you hear from everybody. Oh, like, I would wish like your aunt would call me more often. Maybe something my mom would tell me, or I wish you were, even if it's between mom and son, like, oh, I wish blah 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 would call you. I wish you would call me more. And it's the thing that I'm coming to realize, because as I've said in this podcast and really in my personal life, I had a day last year where I decided that every single day I was going to prioritize the idea that I want to be happy. I didn't feel like I was happy. Like, I mean, I was good, I was good, but I wasn't happy. Like, I knew my life wasn't fulfilled.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, I started using my emotions as a metric. Like, I would use my emotions as like the number one metric to kind of guide and facilitate me, right?
Yes.
And but back then, and like I said, this was like in late November that I kind of wrote this down and decided it. Back then, my emotions were very easily controlled by other people. If someone didn't respond, if someone responded in a certain way, and I would take it personal. Oh, like kind of like what the thing you just said. You respond with like a nice, long, thoughtful message, and then you get a short message back. And that shit would trigger, like, it would make my emotions feel a certain type of way. So in essence, I didn't have control of my own emotions. It was like everybody else can control it. Of course, there was, I had a certain degree of resilience. I'm not saying that every little thing, like, would throw my emotions all over the place.
Yeah.
But I didn't have control of my emotions, right? And I think ultimately, in a lot of ways, that's kind of like the one thing we have control of. We have control of our emotions. We don't have control. I can't control the way you feel. I can't control, like a lot of external things, but I do, in a sense, have control of my emotions.
To a degree, because, the thing is, because the thing is, like, at the end of the day, like, we feel the reason why we have emotional reactions to shit is because value is subjective, and we all value different things to different degrees. And so when we are offering something that we think is representative of being high value, or being a very, good part of ourselves, a very valuable part of ourselves, and it gets rejected, it's like, yeah, in theory, we should be able to control our emotions, but at the same time, it's like, it's like if you don't respond over stuff that you think is of value, it basically is just like every situation is different.
Yeah. And the reason I get to the point that I'm at now, and I use the term control, but I'm starting to find that that's not really the appropriate like term to use, because it's a very indirect form of control. When I say control, I mean acceptance. When I say control, I mean let go. When I say control, I mean like a gentle push. Like, when I say control, It's quite opposite, I guess, of what you would think of control. I guess a better term would be like I have more of a flow of my emotion. Like if I'm starting to flow in one direction, I can kind of gently push it in another. If I'm starting to go in another direction, I've learned certain therapeutic um, disciplines in order to bring me back to homeostasis, right? So I'm not saying that, like, when I think of my mom, I have an emotion. I don't just think of the term mom and think, oh, the caregiver to a human being. Like, I visualize my mom and I have all the emotions that correlate to that. So I'm not saying like, you're emotionless. What I try to say is the fact that when you become more acquainted with yourself and when you are less afraid of judgment, when you are less insecure, and when you give out a lot of love, so then in essence most times you get love back, then you are a lot less sensitive to kind of interactions with people, if that makes sense. Could you hear me? I can't hear you anymore. Yeah, I still can't hear you. But for the people who are listening, uh yeah, he's fixing his earphones right now. Hopefully we can get it fixed up, but I guess I'll just keep talking in the meantime. Um, Let me see. I think it says that you're... Can you talk? Are you talking? Yeah, I can't hear you. You can still hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
Yo, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay.
All right, so you can still hear me
All
then?
right.
Hello? Hello?
Yo.
Yo, can you hear me? Could you hear me?
Yo.
Can you hear me?
Yo. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
All right. So, just to finish my point, it's kind of a hard thing to describe, but in essence, like I said, I've just developed certain mechanisms in which I could kind of bring myself to homeostasis, and
Yes.
external things have much less influence on my emotions. Let's just keep it simple. That's what it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that is a much better yeah, because when I was thinking of control, I was just thinking, I was thinking like, no, if I'm in a, oh no, I recognize that I'm angry, but I'm gonna make myself happy. It's like, yeah, it's like not quite, but no, but I hear what you're saying that like, oh, if you're caught up in another situation where you feel like, oh, I gave this person a message, a really thoughtful message, and they returned with nothing, or just something that was really crass or whatever, instead of recognizing the fact that, oh, I wish I would have got a different reaction, but I also know that so and so is really, they're still having to work or they're stressed out. They got this and that going on in their life. Or you know what? There's some other things that I should be pouring my time into. I've been letting other stuff kind of slip, and I need to be trying to improve the value on that. Or just different analogies. Learning to accept the fact that, yeah, this is the way that I feel. It's not the best feeling, but you know what? That doesn't mean I have to wallow in it. That doesn't mean I have to wallow in it. That doesn't mean I did something wrong to feel this way or that the other person is even in the wrong. It's just recognizing that, oh, okay, this is the way that I feel. This is how I respond to that. And, saying I can just decide that, when that happens, I can just either go for a walk or I can try to talk with somebody else or I can, engage myself in an activity I've been putting off for a while or just,
Yeah, and if you're strong enough, if you're secure enough, all you do is you just see that as feedback. Oh, you know what? I give this kind of message and this person responds in this way. There's either that's just the personality of this person, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can't assume that based off the way someone texts you back it really implies too much because it's ambiguous kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, I read a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, and it was saying that it was an example that the author used between the relationship of him and his brother. He was saying like, the fact that my brother doesn't call me and the fact that my brother doesn't text me as often as I would hope it's not necessarily an appropriate metric to determine our relationship, because maybe that's just him. Maybe he's not a
Yeah.
texter. Maybe he's not a guy who like cares to talk on the phone. Just because you want something from someone and they can't give it to you doesn't necessarily make them a bad person, and it doesn't necessarily mean that your relationship is bad per se, but it
Hmm.
just might mean that your metric for your expectations are one way and these people do not relate to that, right?
Yes.
And
Yes. No,
especially
yeah.
in a place where, let's say it's a family member and you kind of have this like connection, like, you know, you kind of have to be open-minded enough and not say like, oh, you know what, me and my brother's relationship is terrible because he doesn't call me as many times as I would hope to, and he doesn't text me back with the emojis that I would like to get back.
Right.
You know, and
Right.
in other aspects, if it's like a relationship, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, yeah, that's totally fine. You know, if they're not giving you what you would like, then at that point, then you just, you know, it's an indication that this isn't the person for you.
Right. I think that, I think the point that we're trying to strike on is, every yeah, I guess the point you're trying to strike on is that, it's once again, every situation is context is different, because, for somebody that you've already known for 20 plus years, and has seen you at your most vulnerable moments, and vice versa, you're not as concerned. Like, you can hit each other up just once every few months, what I'm saying, for convo or whatever, as long as that's, kind of understood. Like, I have friends who I've known for a long time, and so it's like, of course, we're not going to be hitting each other up like multiple times per week. Um, we'll hit each other up once, what I'm saying, every once in a while, so that way there's a buildup of new shit, because we already know so much about one another's way of thinking and all that shit. But then you're talking about a situation whether it's romantic or business or something, real high stakes, require a lot of investment from all parties involved. And it's like, look, this is part of the risk of getting engaged and getting into this type of relationship. And it's just like, this type of level of engagement with another person. And so it's okay if you're at a place where you're like, hey, I don't enjoy having the message, or excuse me, having the return emails and shit, 20, 5 times per day, or having to respond to, certain kinds of calls, certain times a day. Then it's just like, you know what, that's fine. Continue to be yourself and live the life that you want. But then that means you probably aren't ready then for the stage of doing this other shit, because we need people that are a little bit more willing to jump in the game head on, just like, just, yeah. And as a matter of fact, to use an example, again, of some friends who I've known for a long time, and so it's been understood that, like, we won't hit each other up too often, but
I can't hear you again. I still can't hear you.
yo, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. To use another example, I have some friends that I've known for almost 20 years now. And, so it's understood that we're not going to be hitting each other up multiple times per week, or stuff like that. But we'll still hit each other up, what I'm saying, on shit, and follow each other's social media. But what I started to notice, and this is something that they've even admitted to and acknowledged, that it's not just like with me, but with other people. Oh, we're shitty about returning messages. We're shitty about, saying, doing this and that and stuff. And it's like, okay, but at the same time, one of the last conversations that we had was you asking me, getting suggestions on how to better market your art, and better market, some of the things you're doing, and asking for like business plans and shit. And so I give you a fucking list. I give you a list of things that I think, that I'm trying to incorporate in the mindset I have, and I'm looking for feedback when you explicitly ask for some, and they didn't give any. And so then, and then these same individuals will, they'll engage with you on your social media and stuff until you ask them, like, oh, hey, how you doing? Or did you see my last text message? Or did you hear my, I left a voicemail, blah, blah, blah. Then it's just like radio silent. And the thing is, with all these apps be snitching on people. So it's just like, you can see that they're still online, or that they're still doing this and that activity. So it's like, oh, so you can just come in and just like my shit and be like, oh, yeah, this is cool or whatever. You can't even like this person that you're supposed to have like an intimate, connection with, that long-standing relationship with. You can't even just be like, hey, now's not a good time, or I'll hit you up later, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, there's a fine line where I'm like, Because initially I'm like, oh man, am I being overbearing? Am I being, demanding too much? Am I being too needy? But then once I hear from them that they're like, oh no, it's not just you. We're doing this to everybody. It's just like, okay, well then y'all need to be a little bit more considerate and be like, okay, if you just being yourself right now means not answering a bunch of text messages, but then also having these bonds and these relationships deteriorate, then the question that is posed to you then is, are you okay with that? Are you okay with these people who you've known for so long suddenly gravitating and giving all of their value, whether it's just value in feedback, whether it's just value in actual resources, whether it's just value as an extension of your network? Are you willing to compromise that just because you don't want to be inconvenienced by having to answer a few extra text messages or voicemails? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I get frustrated. There's a in the United States, our hyper individualized culture. It's very much about the individual, and one of the things about that comes from that is just be yourself. Just do what you want. Do whatever just makes you feel happy in that moment, right? Like do whatever just makes you happen to feel good, because you should never have to feel bad, or be inconvenienced, or anything that makes you feel like you can't be yourself. That should be demonized. When it's like, no, sometimes what you are at that moment and what you're trying to do is inadequate. If you're trying to run a marathon and somebody's asking like, oh, how's your conditioning been? How's your diet been? How's your sleep been? And you've been like, oh, I didn't give a fuck. I'm still doing the same old things. And they tell you that's a recipe for disaster. You know what I'm saying? And you just fire back, oh, whatever the fuck, let me do whatever I want. It's like, no, there's objective maintenance that goes on to keeping your body and your mind ready for like physical activity. But the same thing goes for relationships. Relationships demand maintenance and investment, and a lot of people don't want to hear that because it makes it feel like, oh, I have to extend myself, when I don't want to for people in my life. Yes. How do you think you have a family? How do you think you develop that bond that you have with your parents or your aunts and your uncles or anybody, whoever's taking care of you? That's what it was. You have this bond with these people that is essentially just a one-way relationship where all the benefits have mostly flowed downstream. And yet you're not willing, and yet you're not able to contextualize that and say, oh, maybe in my other relationships that aren't family, in order to develop these long-standing bonds, I have to have that same willingness to extend myself to within reason to certain boundaries or whatever, for this other person. And of course reciprocation is a big part of that, but you at least have to be, you in order to even make that argument or to say, hey, I'm waiting for some reciprocation, you have to show that you're willing to meet the person halfway. And if you're already meeting the person halfway or doing what you think you're supposed to do and they not, then that's when you need to start questioning how often you tread over to that bridge, how much you go over to that bridge.
Yeah, and that it's kind of interesting. I'm gonna be very frank right now. Like, it's interesting the way that you're kind of elaborating the whole situation, and then kind of in the back of my head, like, and that's the thing. Like, everyone's brains work different, right? So I'm not. Hey, just give me a sec. So like, I'm not. It's interesting that our minds work differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I could see kind of like your brain works in it seems like in a more meticulous way, or I'm not really sure. Like, I'm not really sure.
I'll say meticulous. That's a fine way to put it.
Yeah, and then for me, because this whole year I've been kind of training myself to, and this would be like the third or fourth time I say it, just kind of bring it down to the most fundamental ideas or principles. Mm-hmm. And I've gone to the point where I've boiled things to like a feeling. And because I just constantly tackle my fears, I gain more and more security or strength within myself. And the things that I hope to become, I've started to communicate with my subconscious to become that thing, which is, I've been telling myself I am compassionate, I am kind, I am strong, I am this. But the thing is, when I say that, it's in a very alpha meditative state. It's kind of hard to explain, but if I were to telling myself I am compassionate and I was telling that out loud to like a group of people, like that would be a little strange. But when I do these things, it's right here in my room by myself, and it's in a very meditative space. And I don't. Yeah, but that's just kind of one point I'm trying to say is that I'm starting to realize that, like, because right now the things that you explained to me, it's a lot of there's a lot of thinking involved, right?
Yeah.
That's just the
Yeah.
way you're explaining it. But for
Yeah.
me, that's
I'm very analytical. I'm very analytical
yeah,
about
exactly.
shit.
And maybe for some people that works, but for me, what I found, because I used to be pretty analytical about a lot of shit too, but then I broke it down. I'm like, no, like don't think, just feel that shit. Like you
Mm.
know what? Like I don't get a good vibe from this person. I don't feel like messaging this person. I messaged that person and I didn't get, I don't feel like it's equal or whatever. I don't feel
Mm.
like responding to them anymore. I'm not gonna be concerned about, oh, I wonder what they're doing. I wonder maybe they're talking to someone else. Maybe they've forgotten about me. Fuck
Mm.
all those thinking. Fuck all that thinking. Like that's just gonna diminish my energy. It's gonna take my mind anywhere from it's gonna take me away from the present. I don't
Mm.
feel like investing more, so I'm just gonna stop that and I'm gonna go back to me and invest into the people where I do have fluidity. Let me call up my mom. Let
Yes.
me call up my brother. Let me call up my homie who just hit me up the other day on Instagram and see how he's doing. Like
Yeah.
it's just channeling your energy and your feelings where they want to go. And when
Yeah.
something doesn't feel good, and if that continues to cycle in your mind, like fuck, like it really kind of pisses me off that this person
Yeah.
didn't reply. Then you know what? Instead of getting so crazy in the thoughts or just going in this like infinite loop, let me just journal myself. Why is it that I care if this person doesn't respond? Is it because I'm insecure about something about myself? Is it because I feel like they might think like I'm this way. Oh wait,
Hmm.
well if I'm worried about their judgment and if I'm worried about them possibly being with somebody else, then that
Hmm.
means that's an insecurity about me. So it's like
Yeah.
I've almost found it that in almost every situation it's always an insecurity about yourself. And then
Mm.
because I've constantly just gone into my journal, I've noted it down, I've questioned myself, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel bad about this person not responding? And then it
Mm.
always comes down to the idea that like it's an insecurity, because if it wasn't an insecurity, then why would you continuously feel bad about the situation? You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. I do. I hear that, and the thing is that like I do like your post that you made a post not too long ago talking about this. And some people will think that it's reminiscent of like, oh, The Secret, or that, oh, your thoughts manifest reality. It's like not exactly, but we are. Like, you use the term fluidity, and there's different names for it, or porous, or being able to adapt, or just being flexible. Bruce Lee said, "Be water."
Yep.
You know. Like you said, channeling that flow. And like, yeah, I am a person that's very analytical. Sometimes I'm over analytical, and it does lead to those spirals where I'm just like, oh shit, I just blew, saying a couple of hours, really just like stewing in my own emotions, saying just thinking about like, oh, did I do this? And when it's just like at the end of the day, like you don't have to have any malice in your heart. Just be like, you know what, that left a really negative taste in my mouth, and I need to go do something to keep myself from doing that, because I very much used to be, and I'll tell you why I feel like I'm this way, where I'm so analytical about this shit, is that for a long time, I guess it was kind of the opposite, was because I didn't have a lot of experience and understanding of things. To be analytical, I was very emotional, and but then after a while, I started getting embarrassed by people whom they were emotional, but they also had their analytical side developed enough to where they were still able to like counter my emotions, or like leave my emotions a certain way. So then I started focusing more on that shit. Um, and things, I've done meditation, I've done like journaling and stuff like that, and I might need to get back into it, because um, I do find myself that like you said, insecurity, and it's like, I don't, I think that's, not every case, but I think that definitely in some cases it can come down to, I want this person to understand this about me, and I want this person to respond in this way, because that will affirm that I am this thing, and that they recognize me as this thing.
Instead
It's
of
one.
just knowing that you are this thing and you don't need to prove it to anybody, kind of thing.
Exactly. So you're absolutely right in that in many instances, a lot of this shit can just be boiled down to a feeling of insecureness and a feeling of wanting to be affirmed. Which, once again, there's nothing wrong with that desire, but you got to keep all of these things in check and realize when that desire for recognition, or when that FOMO, that fear of missing out, starts to become destructive and keep you from doing the things that made you the thing that you thought made you valuable in the first place. Like, you want somebody to recognize you for, an essay you wrote or whatever, and you send it to them, and then you spend so much more time afterwards thinking about why they haven't gotten you back or what they're going to critique, as opposed to you continuing to look over the essay yourself or moving on to your next project or just doing other shit, you know what I'm saying? And, just kind of letting the response come when it comes, so once again, it's very, the situations where it's like, yeah, the person could just be, it could be the other person's fault, but whether or not it is the other person's fault or your fault or just, whatever the fuck, it's embracing that emotion that like, okay, this makes you feel a certain way. It's not a good feeling, but no matter if it's justified or not, I can't just let myself get stuck in a loop of constantly just revving these same emotions.
Yeah, and the thing that's really, really helped me, and I've been talking about this book for a long time, but it's called The Genie Within. Did I mention it to you last time we talked on Skype?
Who wrote it? I think you may have.
Harry Carpenter.
Doesn't sound familiar, but you may have mentioned it before. We talked about it quite a bit last time.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, because once you come to the realization that your subconscious is kind of what your emotions are a part of the subconscious, then once you learn how to communicate with your subconscious, because there are certain principles that you have to be aware of to communicate with your subconscious, that's what I mean about having control of your emotions. Because once you understand how your emotions work and kind of when your emotions are starting to come in and how you can positively use your emotions, and the fact that you can visualize something and then aggregate the emotions that you want to feel based on just a visualization, like because your subconscious doesn't know the difference between reality and something that you're visualizing, right? So that's the exact reason why when you're having a dream, it's as real as it would be if you were actually alive doing it, awake doing it. So that's kind of that's maybe another aspect or element of what I'm talking about when I say you have control of your emotions, because right now I could be sitting here, right? Someone could just wake me up from a nap and I'm completely just like, just barely woke up. I don't know what's going on. And someone could tell me, hey, you know what? You've got 2 minutes and you have to go run a mile as fast as you can outside, right? Let's just say, for instance, if I have really, really good control of my emotions and I've practiced my visualization techniques, I could literally visualize a certain event in my life or have a certain conditioned word or phrase that I've conditioned myself to basically obtain certain emotion or energy based on that term. Then I could literally go from me being in my empty room, like about to have to go run the fastest mile of my life, to then be in the emotional position of like me being at the Olympics. I know it's very because it's something that takes like a high level of training and kind of discipline, but by technicalities, like you can develop that. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, because there's physical conditioning and then there's psychological, emotional conditioning.
Exactly.
It's not just because if you happen to have lost your temper over a situation, that's always going to happen. But you learn techniques of when you start feeling yourself going down that emotional path. Don't ignore it, embrace it, and be like, okay, how do I divert this into something constructive as opposed to destructive and spontaneous?
Exactly. And I think real quick, just to finish off this kind of point, is like me and my brother were just having a pretty deep conversation the other day, and we're talking about have you heard of Taoism or Taoism?
Yes, I have.
So it's about being in the now and kind of being not interpreting anything as good or bad, but just kind of really just kind of going with the flow. Yes. And in my opinion, it's kind of just going with your emotions and what you want to do in the now. I think there's a lot of value to be gained in that, because when you go in the now, when you listen to your gut, when you go with your intuition, there's a lot of fluidity. And of course, being a human being, you're going to get to certain points where you start to feel exhausted or you start to have your mind race. But so long as you kind of resolve or, talk about that issue that you feel, whether it's through journaling, whether it's through you actually calling the person in which you have these negative thoughts, or whether it's you just talking to your best friend about the issue that you're having. Because the genie within also teaches you that every thought that you have, it has a physical reaction on your body, right? So if it's negative or positive, it still has an effect on your body.
Right, because it triggers all the different organs and senses and different chemical, all that shit.
Exactly. So for instance, if you have a negative thought, and if you don't in some shape or form express that thought, or in some way find find some type of like perspective to just kind of to just say that you try to disassemble that thought, then it's
Mm-hmm.
just going to convert into a physical reaction, which could be, you know, cortisol, which could be your heart rate going up, which could be
Yeah.
a number of negative things.
Mm-hmm.
And but if you were to immediately tackle that thought, then you could quickly bounce back.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah. And I.
you
Yeah.
don't get to a point where you just don't have those emotions at all, but you learn these mechanisms to bounce back. And I think
Yes.
this goes to the idea that, you know, because I've been watching certain videos of people who would be considered the best in their craft, like martial arts and just, you know, mainly like sports and stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that usually makes people the best, and not just sports, just any kind of facet, like if it's business or whatever, the thing that makes people the best is usually their ability to recover from certain things that go out of line.
Yes, yes.
It's
When things go wrong, it's not just about when things are going right. It's not just how you react to things going right, because that's easy. You need to think about
exactly.
when things go wrong. And um, the way that I just summarized that is, do you know Quincy Jones? He's a
What?
Quincy Jones. He's a legendary musician and music producer. Maybe his biggest thing he's known for is producing the Thriller album from Michael Jackson,
Okay.
the highest selling album of all time, of course. And in any case, in his autobiography, one of the things that he says is that, like, one of the things he would try to tell himself, don't just think about all the good times, because when things are going good, what is there to worry about? You don't worry about shit when things are going good unless you're like a hypochondriac or something. He said, but far too often people don't anticipate the bad or think about, saying when things are going bad. And so that's why when some people go through little downfalls or whatever, it completely wrecks whatever the fuck they have going on, because it's like, damn, it's like that little bit of like you didn't expect things to go wrong. Like, it's just one of those things where, like, you should expect, if you're trying shit, because good and bad things happen to people when they're not trying shit. So if you're going to actually try to, like, saying, push the needle to some degree in whatever space you happen to be in, you have to expect that shit is going to go not as planned. And you got to be able to recover from that. Same thing like with salespeople, when they say, when you're negotiating a price or whatever, they say, don't get discouraged by the first, if they dismiss the first offer. What you're supposed to do is make the first offer something that most people wouldn't even accept, and then make the second one seem more reasonable, even though the second one is actually the only price that was being offered for your product or service in the first place. So it's learning how to get over that initial, what it's learning to get past that initial, saying mistake, or that initial shortfall, or that initial, saying whatever the fuck, or even if you don't make the sale at all, just realizing, hey, you know what, maybe I'll catch you another time, maybe not, but take it easy, just taking shit in stride.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Yeah, brother, I'm just gonna ask you. I have a question for you that I do for not every podcast, but just kind of podcasts in which I guess I kind of remember.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to kind of give one message to humanity, to the human race, this is the Art of Human podcast. The podcast dedicated to celebrating humanhood via insightful, unique perspective from human beings of all walks of life. And
Mm-hmm.
me as the host, the objective is to hopefully inspire listeners to live a healthier life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what kind of little perspective or what kind of message would you have, assuming that like the entire human race, in spite of whatever language they speak, they could hear your message? What would your message be for humanity?
I would say learn to embrace all sides of yourself, not for seek wholeness, but not perfection. Look to always optimize whatever side of yourself, even if that means only getting yourself up to 10% like proficiency at something. If the best you can only be is like 10% at something, and you're currently at 4 or 5%, do what you can within reason to get yourself up to that, threshold, and see where your max potential is, and be fluid, be water, be adaptable. Recognize that you're not always going to be right, that there's so much more to absorb from outside of yourself. And humiliation is the price of entry. I saw that off of Twitter. Like you're not gonna be able to accomplish anything. A lot of people have a fantasy of being famous or being well known for something or being recognized by their peers as being important or whatever the fuck. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to embrace the fact that you're going to humiliate yourself. You're going to go out there with something that is super precious to you and you think is worth the world, and other people are going to laugh at it and treat it like it's fucking tissue paper. And you have to be, so that's like 4 or 5 things, but I guess actually if I could summarize it to one thing, I would say this: come to grips with the fact that you and everybody else around you have things which are held dearly to them and are worthless to everybody else. One man's trash is another man's treasure, vice versa. One man's treasure is another man's trash. And I think that if more people could come to grips with that simple fact, there'd be a lot less confusion. There'd be a lot more understanding of the complexity of ourselves and of one another.
All right, brother. Yeah, that's kind of the way I wanted to just kind of wrap up the podcast. I'll be honest, I'm pretty tired.
Oh, you good, man. You good.
Based off my feeling, this is the moment, man. But yeah, dude, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I really do feel like we had a very nice, fluid conversation.
Yeah.
I'm for real. Like, I learned a lot from talking to you, not only this time, but the session that we've done before.
Yeah, hell yeah, man.
I appreciate you so much for the open-mindedness that you have, for just you expressing yourself in a very honest way, for you kind of making yourself a bit vulnerable or exposing yourself, telling us about your past and the way you kind of grew up and certain things like that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, man, and I appreciate you having me on, and obviously being the type of person cultivating a space, where people can feel that they can do that, because it's goes back and forth. To be vulnerable, you have to feel that there's a space for you to do that and for it to be to be worthwhile.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea behind the podcast. I want to have a podcast where people, I feel like they're gonna be listened to, of course, and feel like they can share and talk about anything they want, to not be afraid. And yeah, man, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to being on your podcast sometime.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. We'll make it happen.
All right, brother. It's been so good. Have a good day, okay?
All right, you too, man. I enjoyed it. Take it easy.
Peace out, brother.
Yeah, peace.